Ever feel like you're wrestling with something in the dark? You know, something huge, maybe something you can't quite grasp.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our sources today take us right into that feeling. We're doing a deep dive into a really foundational story from Genesis.
Yeah.
Jacob wrestling with God.
Yeah, Genesis 32. It's a story that's, well, central to faith traditions, but honestly, it still puzzles people. It's got layers.
It really does. And that's our mission today, isn't it? To kind of unpack this encounter using two powerful lenses, Christian history and psychology.
Exactly. We've looked at insights from, way back with the church fathers right up to modern psychological takes, trying to understand why the story still hits home.
So what are we hoping to cover? We'll start with the basics. What actually happens in the story? This wrestling match by the river.
Right. And then the big questions, why wrestling? Why did God, or this divine figure, choose that specific way to interact with Jacob?
Yeah, and the name change. That shift from Jacob to Israel is huge. We need to explore what that meant, how it changed everything for him, his relationship with God.
Definitely. And finally, what can we, today draw from this ancient struggle for our own lives, for our own faith, maybe our understanding of prayer?
And it's fascinating how bringing in those historical and psychological views really adds depth, doesn't
It
it?
absolutely does. Okay,
Yep.
so let's set the scene. Where does this famous wrestling match actually take place?
Right, so the Bible tells us Jacob is alone. He set his family, his servants, everything he owns across the Jabbok River.
So he's vulnerable, totally exposed, really. And he's about to face Esau, his brother, who he seriously wronged years ago. The tension must have been sky high.
You can only imagine. And it's there, in the dark, by the river, that this unnamed man appears and confronts him.
And it's not just a confrontation. It immediately turns into this intense physical struggle, a wrestling match.
All night long. I mean, just picture that. Dawn is breaking, and they're still locked in this struggle.
And then the man strikes Jacob's hip, dislocating it, a serious injury.
But even then, Jacob doesn't let go. He realizes who he's wrestling with, or at least that this is someone with divine power.
Right. He clings on and demands, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Even injured, he persists.
And that's when the name change happens. The wrestler asks his name Jacob, meaning supplanter or trickster, basically.
And then declares, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel."
Israel, which means he who struggles with God or God strives. It's powerful. He essentially says Jacob has struggled with God and with humans and has, well, prevailed or endured.
And Jacob names the place Peniel, face of God, because he says, "I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared."
He walks away into the sunrise, changed, physically marked with a limp, which our sources note is the origin of that Israelite dietary custom about the thigh sinew.
Yeah, not eating the tendon near the hip socket. But beyond the physical, psychologically, you can really see this as Jacob wrestling with himself, can't you? Well, think about it. All that guilt about Esau, the deception, the fear of retribution. This physical wrestling could be seen as an externalization of that intense inner turmoil he's facing right before the reunion.
Like his internal struggle made manifest. Interesting. And historically, of course, it's monumental. It gives the people their name Israel.
Exactly. It defines their relationship with God right from the start as one that involves, well, struggle and engagement.
Okay, so let's tackle that question directly. Why wrestling? What do the theological sources suggest?
Theologically, it's often viewed as this incredible act of divine condescension. God meeting Jacob on his own terms, almost.
What do you mean, on his own terms?
Well, Jacob's life has been about striving, grappling, using his own strength and cunning. So God engages him in a physical struggle, a tangible manifestation of the spiritual and internal wrestling Jacob needs to do.
So God meets him right where he is in his resistance.
Precisely. It's like God is saying, okay, you want to struggle, let's struggle, but let's make it real. It forces Jacob to confront things directly, not through manipulation.
And that connects to the psychological angle too, right?
Right.
Physically working through that guilt and fear about Esau.
Absolutely. It's cathartic, maybe, but it also teaches a fundamental lesson about faith.
Which is?
That true faith isn't passive, it's active engagement. Sometimes it is a struggle. It's wrestling with doubt, with God, with yourself. And that struggle leads to a deeper relationship.
And historically, that name, Israel, cements this idea for a whole people. Wrestling with God becomes part of their identity.
It does. Some sources even point to this as a kind of foreshadowing, God entering the physical human sphere, hinting towards the incarnation later on.
Wow. And the timing, as you said, is crucial. He's at this major crossroads.
Absolutely. This encounter prepares him. It breaks his self-reliance, symbolized by the limp, and teaches him that real blessing comes not from trickery, but from honest, persistent engagement with the divine.
Okay, let's focus on that name change. Jacob to Israel, supplanter to he who struggles with God. What's the core significance there?
Theologically, it's huge. It signifies a new identity, a new covenant relationship. He's no longer defined solely by his deceptive past.
His identity is now rooted in this encounter with God.
Exactly. It's a fulfillment, or maybe a deepening, of the promises God made to his grandfather, Abraham. His struggle becomes part of his sacred identity.
And what about the psychological impact of receiving a new name like that from God?
Oh, it would be incredibly affirming. Think about it. It's like divine acceptance, despite his flaws. It's integrating his struggles. They're not erased, but they're acknowledged and even woven into his new purpose. It's healing.
So it's not about forgetting the past, but transforming its meaning.
Precisely. And historically, this becomes the bedrock identity for the nation.
Yeah.
The people of Israel are those descended from this man who wrestled with God.
It's interesting that the name Israel has that dual edge. He struggles with God, but also possibly God strives.
Right. It captures that dynamic perfectly, doesn't it? The relationship involves both human effort, human struggle, and divine action, divine striving. It reflects the complexity of faith itself. It's not simple.
No, and our sources remind us this isn't the only time God renames someone in the Bible. Think Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah. It often marks a pivotal shift in purpose and relationship. So this whole encounter, the wrestling, the injury, the blessing, the name change, how did it fundamentally alter Jacob's relationship with God going forward?
It moved it from being often indirect and maybe even manipulative on Jacob's part to being intensely direct and personal.
Face to face, as the name Peniel suggests.
Exactly. He'd encountered God before, maybe in dreams or through messengers, but this was raw, physical, undeniable. Psychologically, he now has this persistence, this boldness in seeking God's blessing, born from that struggle.
In the injury, the limp, what role does that play long term?
It introduces lasting vulnerability. He can't ever fully rely on his own strength or cleverness again. That limp is a constant physical reminder of the encounter and his dependence on God.
So it's a mark of weakness, but also of something else.
A mark of the encounter itself. A sign of transformation. His understanding of blessing has changed too. It's not something you can scheme for. It's received through faith, through wrestling, through dependence.
And his identity is now cemented as Israel.
Yes, grounded in God. And interestingly, look at how he approaches Esau afterwards. There seems to be a new humility, maybe less fear, and more trust in God's plan.
He bows down repeatedly. It's a different Jacob.
It is, and there's a deepened awe, a reverence, shown by naming the place Peniel. This encounter sets a pattern for the relationship between God and Israel, one of intimacy, yes, but also often involving tension and struggle.
It really feels like there are so many takeaways here for us today. What are some key lessons Christians might draw from Jacob's story?
Well, first, I think it champions authentic faith. A faith that's tenacious, engaged, willing to wrestle with the hard questions and persist in prayer, even when it's difficult.
It's not about having all the answers neatly sorted.
Not at all. It also reveals a God who isn't afraid of our struggles, who actually meets us in them. It shows God desires relationship, deep and personal.
And the physicality of it reminds us that faith isn't just mental, right?
Exactly. It involves our whole being, body, mind, spirit. It teaches us that our true identity is found in God, not our past mistakes or successes.
Transformation is possible, but it might leave a mark.
Yes, divine encounters change us, sometimes visibly, like Jacob's limp. And crucially, it shows that blessing often comes through struggle, not by avoiding it. Our difficulties can be the very place God meets us and blesses us.
That's a powerful thought. It also highlights that balance between our effort, Jacob holding on, and divine grace, the blessing being given.
Right, and it acknowledges that spiritual growth isn't always easy. It can be costly. It requires vulnerability.
So how can we connect Jacob's very specific dramatic struggle to the kind of spiritual wrestling we might experience in our own lives?
Well, Jacob was at a point of crisis, transition, real vulnerability. We all face times like that, don't we? Moments where we feel alone, uncertain, facing something difficult from our past or future. And the physicality of his wrestling, I think, speaks to how our spiritual struggles can feel embodied. They affect us physically, emotionally. They aren't just abstract ideas.
That makes sense. They can be exhausting.
They can. Jacob's story encourages us to persevere, to keep engaging, keep praying, keep seeking transformation, even when it feels like an all-night battle. It validates the struggle.
It suggests that wrestling with God, with faith, with doubt, isn't a failure of faith, but actually part of it.
Exactly. It's often through that wrestling that we're shaped, refined, transformed. God uses it. And these encounters are deeply personal, just like Jacob's was unique to him.
And sometimes, maybe God initiates these wrestling matches in our lives, puts us in situations where we have to grapple.
That seems possible, doesn't it? It can also be seen as that necessary inner work, confronting our own shadows, the parts of ourselves we'd rather not face, like Jacob had to face his past seed.
But the ultimate outcome, like for Jacob, can be blessing.
Yes. Deeper relationship, greater dependence, a clearer sense of identity, a profound experience of God's grace emerging right out of the struggle itself.
Okay, so if we were to boil down the key insights from this deep dive into Jacob wrestling at Peniel.
I'd say it's fundamentally a story about transformation through struggle. It shows that truly engaging with God, even when it's hard, even when it feels like a fight, leads to a new identity, a deeper relationship, and unexpected blessings.
And it paints a picture of God who is incredibly involved, willing to get right into the thick of our human messiness.
Absolutely. A God who invites persistence, honesty, and real engagement, wrestling and all.
That definitely gives us a lot to chew on. So maybe for you listening, a final thought to consider. Where in your own life does it feel like you're in a kind of wrestling match right now? Maybe with God, with circumstances, with yourself?
Mhm.
How could Jacob's story, thinking about it through these lenses of history and psychology, maybe encourage you to hang on, to keep seeking that blessing, that understanding right there in the midst of the struggle? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.